He woke up before the sun, as he always did. His apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside his floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked out over the skyline, watching the first streaks of light paint the towers gold. For most people, mornings like this meant a cup of coffee, a little calm before the day began. For him, it was the first checkpoint in a race that never ended. He had built everything from scratch, brick by brick, deal by deal, till he owned companies that reached across the country and beyond. His life was measured not in minutes or hours, but in millions of dollars, millions of people affected by his decisions, millions of details to track. He moved through his apartment with precision, almost like a machine that had been trained to perform certain tasks in a specific order. Coffee was brewed exactly at 6, eggs cooked just the way he liked them. And his newspaper was already laid out on the table, though he rarely read it for pleasure. Every headline was a reminder that the world was moving, and he needed to stay ahead or risk being left behind. He dressed sharply, even for home. A man in his position could not be seen slouching or sloppy even when nobody was watching. Every cuff, every tie, every shoe polished to perfection was a statement. I am ready. I am in control. By 7, his private driver was waiting outside to take him to his office. The building was his own, of course, a gleaming tower of steel and glass that reflected the morning light like a mirror. He entered without fanfare, nodding at the security guards who had long ago stopped being intimidating, and now simply existed to remind him that the world still required rules. Inside, the lobby was quiet and pristine. Marble floors, high ceilings, and an aroma that combined subtle cologne with the faint scent of fresh flowers. Everything here was controlled, everything precise. He liked it that way. Chaos, he had learned long ago, was the enemy of success. As he rode the elevator up, he thought about the day ahead. Meetings with investors, calls with CEOs, strategy sessions with his inner circle of executives. Each decision could shift markets, make or break partnerships, and affect hundreds, sometimes thousands of employees. He thrived in this environment. The pressure, the weight of responsibility, it all energized him. Some people ran marathons. He ran companies, and the stakes were much higher. He liked to think that he had eyes everywhere, that every corner of his empire was visible to him, that nothing escaped his attention. But even he could not see everything. The office was a whirlwind of activity as he stepped off the elevator. Assistants rushed with tablets in hand. Security personnel moved with silent efficiency, and somewhere in the background, the low murmur of conversations created a steady hum. His executive team was waiting, already gathered in the large glass-walled conference room. Charts and graphs filled the screens, and his advisors spoke in measured tones about projections, profits, and potential risks. He listened carefully, nodding occasionally, asking questions that forced them to think twice, to justify their strategies. This was his comfort zone. This was where he felt alive. Despite all this, a tension had begun to settle in his chest over the past few days. A new project was nearing completion, one that could redefine the company's future. It was a massive undertaking, with contracts, suppliers, and international partners involved. A single misstep could cost millions, not to mention the damage it could do to his reputation. His team assured him everything was on track. They presented data, timelines, and risk assessments. Every metric suggested success. Yet somewhere deep inside, he felt that uneasy sensation he had learned to recognize over the years, a subtle whisper of doubt that maybe, just maybe, something had been missed. He pushed the feeling aside, telling himself it was nothing. After all, he had built his empire on trust in systems and people. He had surrounded himself with the best, handpicked the sharpest minds, and created redundancies that were supposed to prevent any disaster. He liked to believe that failure was something other people experienced. Not him, not now, not when the stakes were this high. And yet, the quiet unease lingered, gnawing at him like a shadow he could not quite see. Meanwhile, in the same building, the janitor moved quietly through the halls. He had been with the company for years, unnoticed by most, invisible in a world where money and status dominated attention. His job was simple: clean, maintain, and ensure the office functioned smoothly behind the scenes. Yet, he saw things others didn't. While executives were buried in spreadsheets and conference calls, he noticed the details: a flickering light, a misplaced file, a cable stretched too far across the floor. He saw patterns in chaos, connections that others overlooked. Small irregularities that might seem insignificant, but sometimes held the key to disaster. That morning, as he mopped the floors and wiped down surfaces, he glanced at a corner of the office where a critical system terminal was left running. It was unusual. Normally, these were secured or monitored, but today, something was off. The numbers on the screen flickered in a way that caught his attention. He had no formal training in finance or management, but his experience gave him a keen sense of when something was wrong. There was a tiny inconsistency, almost imperceptible, yet it nagged at him. He filed it away in his mind. It's like a piece of a puzzle he couldn't yet fully see. The billionaire was oblivious to this, caught up in the rhythm of meetings, calls, and strategic discussions. He signed documents, approved transactions, and gave guidance with the ease of someone who had been doing this his entire life. His world was one of power and influence, where every decision reverberated far beyond the walls of his office. Yet, the things he could not see, the errors hidden in plain sight, were quietly accumulating, waiting for the moment they could no longer be ignored. As the morning turned into afternoon, he walked through the open floor plan of his office, greeting staff and shaking hands with important visitors. He smiled, nodded, and listened, projecting confidence and control. Everyone in the room assumed the empire was secure because he was there. They had built their trust on his presence, on the sense that he could handle anything. What they did not know, what they could not see, was that the smallest flaw, the tiniest mistake, could undermine everything they had worked so hard to achieve. He returned to his private office, where he could finally breathe for a moment. Though even there, the pressure never truly lifted. He leaned back in his chair, thinking about the numbers, the schedules, the next deal, the next challenge. He had become accustomed to this constant balancing act, this dance on the edge of perfection. Success demanded it. Failure punished the careless. And yet, even in this controlled environment, there were variables beyond his control. He could not watch every screen, inspect every detail, or anticipate every outcome. In a small, quiet corner of the building, the janitor paused in his routine. He looked at the same terminal again, noticing the numbers shifting ever so slightly, a subtle warning sign. It made him uneasy. He could feel it in his chest, a kind of instinct that told him something was wrong. He didn't know what it was yet, only that it mattered, and that it might matter a great deal. The thought was simple but frightening. If no one noticed this, if no one acted, the consequences could be disastrous. And so the day continued. The billionaire carried on with his life, unaware of the shadow creeping through his empire. Meetings were held, deals were signed, and plans were executed. The world saw a man in complete control, confident, unstoppable, untouchable. But behind the polished floors, in the unnoticed corners of the building, a small voice of observation persisted. The janitor, moving silently, watching closely, held in his mind the possibility that the empire's greatest strength, its leader, might also be its most vulnerable point. By evening, the billionaire was exhausted but satisfied. Another day had passed. Decisions had been made, progress achieved. He looked out over the city again, lights flickering like stars in the distance. He allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, thinking about how far he had come, how much he had accomplished. The world was his, he told himself. He had built it, shaped it, and controlled it. Nothing could touch him, not now. Not ever. Yet, in the shadows of that world, the janitor lingered, unseen, silent, observant. A man whose simple vigilance could one day change the course of everything. A man who noticed the details others missed. Who understood that even the greatest could be brought to the brink by a single, overlooked error. The stage was set. The pieces were moving. And the billionaire, confident and unstoppable, did not yet know how close he was to disaster. The building was quiet that evening, a a calm that only came when the last of the executives had left for the day. Lights were dimmed, phones were silent, and the hum of computers was nearly gone. The billionaire had long since departed for a private dinner with investors, a routine he kept without fail. He left his office in the hands of his team, confident that everything would proceed smoothly. They were skilled, experienced, and dedicated. At least that's what he believed. Meanwhile, the janitor moved through the hallways with his mop and cleaning supplies. He had worked in this building for years, moving almost invisibly through its corridors. Most of the staff barely noticed him, and that suited him just fine. It allowed him to focus, to observe, to pay attention to things that others overlooked. It was a skill he had developed over time, not because he wanted recognition, but because he cared. He cared about doing his job well, and about keeping the place running smoothly. Sometimes that meant noticing small problems that could grow into big ones. That evening, as he made his rounds, his eyes were drawn to the same terminal he had seen that morning. It was a workstation for one of the company's critical projects, a program that handled major operations. Most people would have ignored it, thinking it was just another computer with numbers and data scrolling across the screen. But the janitor had a way of seeing beyond what was obvious. He noticed a pattern that didn't belong, a small irregularity that could grow into a massive problem if left unchecked. He stopped and crouched beside the machine, studying it carefully. The numbers flickered again, just for a moment, like a heartbeat that skipped. Something about it felt wrong, though he couldn't yet explain why. He knew the executives would laugh if he told them. They would say he didn't understand the system, that he was imagining things. But he trusted his instincts. He had learned over the years that small inconsistencies could lead to disasters. For a long time, he simply watched, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The office was silent except for the soft whir of the ventilation system and the occasional distant sound of a car passing on the street below. He could feel his heart beating faster, a mix of curiosity and unease. What he saw on the screen was subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but to him it was like a flashing warning light. He knew that if no one acted, something very bad could happen. He considered going directly to the executives. They were in charge, after all. But he hesitated. They were busy people. They would not want to be bothered by a janitor with questions they considered trivial. He imagined their responses. "We've got it under control," or "You don't understand what you're looking at." The thought made him sigh. He had seen this before, small issues dismissed until they became emergencies. He didn't want that to happen here. Still, he couldn't ignore it. He decided to document what he was seeing, making notes in a small notebook he always carried. He wrote down the numbers, the time, and the changes he noticed. His handwriting was messy, but it was clear enough that anyone looking at it later could understand what he had observed. It was a small act, but it gave him a sense of control, a way to keep track of the problem without panicking. As he worked, he thought about the billionaire. He didn't know him personally, only by reputation. He had seen him in the building a few times, walking with purpose, commanding attention without speaking loudly. The janitor knew that the billionaire was confident, perhaps too confident. He had built an empire, yes, but even the smartest people could overlook small things. Details that seemed insignificant at the time, but could have huge consequences. He realized that this might be one of those moments. The janitor decided to take a small risk. He called the head of the security team, a man who had always been fair and willing to listen to concerns. He explained what he had seen, trying to keep his voice steady. "There's something wrong with the system," he said simply. "I don't know if it's important, but it doesn't look right." The security head was skeptical. "Are you sure? This isn't really your area." The janitor nodded. "I don't know for sure, but I can show you." Together, they returned to the terminal. The janitor pointed to the numbers flickering, the slight misalignment in the data flow, the small errors that seemed to repeat at regular intervals. The security head leaned in, frowning. He could see the anomaly, though he didn't fully understand it either. "Okay," he said cautiously. "Let me get someone from it. Maybe they can check it out before it becomes a problem." The janitor agreed. He felt a small sense of relief. At least someone was paying attention. It arrived quickly. A team of young professionals who worked late shifts to keep everything running smoothly. They looked at the terminal, checked the system, and ran diagnostics. The janitor watched silently, his heart pounding. The executives were still out of the building, and the billionaire was miles away, unaware of the ticking time bomb in his empire. The room was tense, filled with the quiet urgency of people who suddenly realized that something might be wrong. After several minutes, one of the IT specialists looked up, eyes wide. "This could be serious," he said. "If this error isn't fixed, it could affect the whole project. Millions of dollars, maybe more." The janitor nodded, though he tried to remain calm. He had suspected as much. He had seen small problems grow before, and he knew the consequences could be devastating. They began working to fix it, typing quickly, running tests, and double-checking each step. The janitor stayed close, offering observations when he noticed patterns or changes. It was unusual, he knew, but he felt a responsibility to keep watching. He understood the stakes better than anyone in the room. A disaster here could ripple through the company, affecting hundreds of employees, investors, and partners. It could destroy the very empire the billionaire had spent decades building. Hours passed. The building was nearly empty. The hum of computers and the occasional murmur of voices the only sounds. The janitor moved quietly, keeping an eye on the screens, making small notes, and pointing out anything that seemed off. The IT team worked tirelessly, running simulations, checking connections, and verifying every detail. The tension in the room grew, a mixture of fear and determination. Everyone understood that they were racing against time, though no one had a full picture of what might happen if they failed. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the main error was located. A simple misconfiguration, a tiny detail overlooked in the rush to meet deadlines, had caused the potential disaster. The IT team corrected it, tested the system, and confirmed that everything was now functioning properly. The room relaxed slightly, though the sense of urgency remained. The janitor let out a quiet sigh of relief. He had done his part, but he knew the situation was still delicate. He thought about the billionaire again. The man was completely unaware of what had just happened, completely confident that everything was running smoothly. No one had told him, and for now, no one would. The janitor realized that he had prevented a disaster without anyone ever knowing. It was a strange feeling, a mix of pride and unease. He had saved millions, possibly more, but in the eyes of the world, he was still just a janitor. As he finished his rounds and prepared to leave for the night, he reflected on the day. He had seen something others missed, taken a risk to act, and helped avert a catastrophe. He didn't need thanks or recognition. What mattered was that the company, the people, and the projects were safe. He understood that sometimes the smallest voices could make the biggest difference. Sometimes the most important people in a room were those who went unnoticed. The building was quiet as he stepped outside. The night air was cool, and the city lights sparkled in the distance. He walked to his car, thinking about the billionaire, the IT team, and the fragile balance of success. It was a world full of power, wealth, and influence, but also one full of vulnerabilities. And sometimes it was the simple act of paying attention. Noticing the small things that made all the difference, he got into his car and drove home, tired but satisfied. He knew tomorrow would bring another day, another set of challenges, and another opportunity to observe, notice, and act. He didn't know what the future held, but he understood one thing clearly. Vigilance mattered. Awareness mattered. And sometimes, heroes came in unexpected forms, and somewhere far away. The billionaire continued his evening, unaware of the disaster he had narrowly avoided. Confident, assured, and in complete control, or so he believed. The janitor, quiet and observant, had seen the danger enacted. The empire had survived another day, thanks to a man who was often invisible, but whose attention to detail had made all the difference. The next morning, the billionaire arrived at his office early, as usual. The city was just waking up, and the streets were already starting to hum with life. He stepped into the building, nodded to the security staff, and walked toward his office with the confidence of someone who believed he had everything under control. Nothing had changed from yesterday, or so he thought. The janitor was already at work. moving quietly through the halls, sweeping, mopping, and tidying up. His mind was not on the routine chores alone, but on what he had witnessed the previous evening. He replayed the events over and over in his head. The small error he had noticed, the hesitation of the IT team before they fixed it, and the potential disaster it could have caused, all of it weighed on him. He didn't tell anyone, because he knew most people would brush it off, but he felt a deep responsibility. This wasn't about recognition. It was about preventing harm. As the morning went on, the janitor kept a close eye on the operations room. The executives were busy with their schedules, moving between meetings and calls, discussing strategies and presentations. They were focused on projections, contracts, and timelines. Completely unaware that the foundation of one of their biggest projects had almost collapsed the night before, the janitor noticed small inconsistencies again, tiny signals that something might still be off. He didn't know exactly what, but his instinct told him to pay attention. He tried to bring it up with one of the junior staff members in it, hoping they would listen. "I think something's wrong again," he said cautiously. The staff member glanced at him, unsure how to respond. "I'll check it," they said, but their tone suggested that they didn't take him seriously. The janitor nodded, keeping his calm. He had learned that persistence mattered more than arguing. Sometimes people only listened when they saw proof. Hours passed. The building became busier as meetings piled up. The billionaire held discussions with his top advisors, negotiating deals worth millions, giving instructions, and making decisions that would affect countless people. He moved with precision, a constant whirlwind of energy and focus. He was confident, even smug in his knowledge, that he had the best people watching every detail, every number, every operation. But his confidence was exactly what made him vulnerable. Confidence can blind even the wisest people to dangers hiding in plain sight. In a small office, away from the main conference rooms, the janitor noticed a message flashing on one of the monitors in the operations room. He paused. It was subtle, barely noticeable, a minor warning signal. Most people would have ignored it, assuming it was part of routine updates or system notifications. But he remembered the last near disaster and felt his heart tighten. He knew the stakes could be even higher this time. The tiniest misstep could cascade into a major crisis. He tried to flag it to the head of IT, who was rushing between meetings and calls. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the screen. The IT head glanced quickly and said, "It's probably nothing. We're busy right now." The janitor's stomach sank. He knew that this was not nothing. He didn't have formal authority, and no one seemed to trust his judgment because of his role. That was always the challenge. The higher the stakes, the more invisible he became. Realizing that no one was listening, the janitor decided he had to act differently. He couldn't rely on others to notice what he saw. He needed to find a way to reach the billionaire directly, even though that was unusual and risky. He had never spoken to the billionaire one-on-one. The man was always surrounded by assistants, security, and executives. But this situation required courage, and the janitor felt that if he waited, it might be too late. He planned carefully. The billionaire had a routine, predictable in its precision. Lunch was scheduled at a private dining area within the building, usually attended only by a few advisors. The janitor decided that this would be his opportunity. He cleaned the hallway leading to the dining area slowly, making sure he looked like he was doing his usual work while keeping an eye on the billionaire's movements. Timing was crucial. He needed to approach at the right moment, when the man would pause long enough to listen. Finally, the moment came. The billionaire walked into the dining area, accompanied by two assistants carrying folders. He nodded at familiar faces and smiled politely, confident and commanding, unaware that a minor disaster might be unfolding behind the scenes. The janitor followed him at a safe distance, pretending to carry supplies, till the billionaire reached a quiet corner near the windows. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves, and decided it was now or never. "Excuse me, sir," the janitor said, his voice calm but firm. The billionaire turned, slightly surprised to see him standing there. He studied the man for a moment, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "Yes?" he asked, his tone polite but cautious. The janitor didn't hesitate. "There's a serious error in the system. It could affect the whole project if it's not fixed immediately." For a moment, The billionaire stared, processing the words. The man was used to hearing warnings from his advisors, analysts, and executives, not from a janitor. He raised an eyebrow. "A janitor?" he asked, his voice skeptical. "Yes, sir," the man replied. "I noticed it last night. It is aware, but I think it's more serious than they realize. It needs your attention." The billionaire was quiet for a moment, studying him. Confidence gave way to a flicker of doubt. The way the janitor spoke, calmly but with certainty, made the billionaire pause. He excused himself from the table and followed the janitor toward the operations room. The assistants exchanged glances, but were unsure whether to intervene. The janitor led the billionaire to the terminal, pointing out the numbers and the irregularities. The billionaire leaned in, scanning the screen with sharp, calculating eyes. For the first time that day, he felt a chill of uncertainty. Something was not right, and he could feel it. Together, they began to assess the situation. The billionaire asked questions, precise and detailed, probing the data. The janitor answered as best as he could, explaining what he had observed, when he had seen it, and why it concerned him. The billionaire's assistants and IT staff slowly joined, realizing that this was serious. The room was tense, filled with a mixture of disbelief, urgency, and focused determination. The janitor had managed to get the attention of the man whose empire depended on this very system. The billionaire worked quickly, coordinating with IT to verify the problem. Numbers, graphs, and calculations moved across screens. The irregularities were subtle, but real, just as the janitor had said. If ignored, they could have caused major financial loss, delayed projects, and damaged reputations. The billionaire's mind raced. He realized that his confidence in his team had nearly cost him everything. He had relied on experts, systems, and processes. But the smallest detail had almost slipped through unnoticed. The janitor remained calm throughout, observing, pointing out patterns, and assisting as needed. He didn't seek recognition. He simply focused on the task. His eyes caught every minor detail, every flicker on the screen that could indicate a problem. The billionaire watched him, a mixture of respect and surprise forming. He realized that wisdom and insight didn't always come from titles or status. Sometimes it came from people who were patient, observant, and willing to act when others overlooked the obvious. Hours passed as the team worked to correct the error. The billionaire coordinated actions, double-checked results, and ensured that the project was back on track. The janitor continued to observe and assist quietly, offering guidance when his instincts suggested it was needed. It was an unusual scene: a billionaire, his top advisors, and a janitor working together in urgent collaboration, all focused on a single goal. The balance of power and hierarchy faded in the face of necessity. By late afternoon, the immediate danger had passed. The system was stabilized, errors corrected, and protocols updated to prevent the problem from recurring. The room relaxed slightly, though the sense of relief was tempered by the realization of how close they had come to disaster. The billionaire exhaled slowly, processing what had just happened. His empire was intact, thanks to vigilance, courage, and a willingness to listen to someone he would normally have overlooked. He turned to the janitor. "Ma'am," a man who had quietly guided him through the crisis. "You noticed this before anyone else," he said. "You acted when others ignored it." "I don't know what to say," janitor shrugged, modest. "I just saw something wrong. I wanted to make sure it was fixed before it caused problems." The billionaire studied him for a long moment, a newfound respect forming. He realized that true insight didn't come from wealth or status. It came from attention, care, and a willingness to act, no matter who you were. The day ended with a quiet acknowledgement. The billionaire returned to his private office, reflecting on the events. He thought about the assumptions he had made, the blind spots he had ignored, and the importance of listening to unexpected voices. The janitor returned to his routine, satisfied that he had done what needed to be done. Recognition was not necessary. The knowledge that disaster had been prevented was reward enough. In the hallways of the building, life returned to normal. Employees moved through their routines, unaware of the close call that had almost disrupted everything. The billionaire resumed his schedule, cautious now, but still confident in his leadership. and the janitor, often invisible, had quietly changed the course of the day, proving that courage, observation, and persistence could make a difference even in the most unlikely circumstances. The next morning, the billionaire arrived at his office with a sense of renewed awareness. Yesterday had shaken him more than he would admit. Sitting in traffic on the way to the building, he found himself thinking about the error the janitor had spotted. He replayed the moments in his head the way the man had calmly pointed out the problem. The quiet confidence in his eyes, and how the team had scrambled to prevent a potential disaster. It had been a wake-up call. He realized that his wealth and power could not guarantee foresight. Even the best systems and the smartest executives could overlook small details that might threaten everything. Inside the building, the janitor was already at work, moving through the quiet hallways before the rush of staff arrived. He felt a strange mix of satisfaction and tension. He had helped prevent a disaster yesterday, but he knew his work was never done. In a building this large, with systems this complex, new errors could arise at any moment. His instinct told him to remain alert. Experience had taught him that the world was full of hidden dangers, and sometimes the smallest detail could be the difference between success and failure. The morning began like any other. Employees entered the building, assistants and executives exchanged greetings, and the hum of activity gradually filled the air. The billionaire walked through the hallways, nodding to familiar faces, but he carried a subtle change in demeanor. He was quieter, more observant. He noticed things he had overlooked before. A misaligned document on a desk, flicker on a screen, a hesitant glance from a team member. He realized that these small signals often contained the truth he had been missing. His confidence had been shaken, but it was not broken. Instead, it had transformed into something sharper willingness to see what others ignored. Meanwhile, the janitor moved toward the operations room. The IT team had implemented temporary fixes yesterday, but he had a lingering concern. Some irregularities still persisted, subtle and nearly invisible, but enough to set off alarm bells in his mind. He began scanning the data again, his eyes trained to notice patterns that most people would overlook. Hours of careful observation revealed small discrepancies in the way information flowed through the system. Nothing catastrophic yet, but if ignored, these issues could spiral into serious problems. He decided to act preemptively. Unlike yesterday, he was determined not to rely solely on luck or hope that someone would notice. He wrote detailed notes on each anomaly, making a timeline of potential consequences. His handwriting was neat enough for anyone to follow, yet messy enough to remind him that this was not an official report. He then approached the IT lead again, calmly explaining what he had observed and why it could become critical if left unchecked. The IT lead frowned, clearly troubled, and began running tests to verify the findings. The situation began to intensify as the day progressed. Small errors in the system started to trigger alerts, subtle messages that something was not functioning as intended. The janitor noticed them first, moving quickly to confirm and document each one. He realized that this time, the problem was more serious than the previous night's near disaster. A cascade of errors could affect multiple departments, delay projects, and potentially cost millions. His heart beat faster as he understood the gravity of what might happen if no immediate action was taken. He decided that waiting for the executives to notice was no longer an option. He needed to escalate the matter directly to the billionaire, but approaching him was not simple. The man's schedule was tightly controlled, assistants and advisors surrounding him at every turn. The janitor had to think carefully about the right moment, a moment when he could speak without being brushed aside or ignored. He planned his approach, watching the billionaire's movements closely, looking for a brief opportunity to gain attention. That moment came during a mid-morning break. The billionaire stepped out of a meeting and walked toward a small lounge area where he could take a few minutes to clear his mind. The janitor approached quietly, carrying a small notebook with all his observations. "Sir," he said gently, "there's a serious issue in the system. It needs immediate attention. I've documented the anomalies and the potential risks." The billionaire stopped, surprised, and studied the man for a long moment. There was no sarcasm in his expression, only curiosity and a hint of caution. He followed the janitor back to the operations room. Where the IT team had begun to implement fixes based on the janitor's observations, the screens flickered with data, numbers shifting and recalculating as the systems attempted to stabilize. The billionaire's sharp eyes scanned the screens, and he could immediately see that something was off. He asked pointed questions, challenging assumptions, probing the data. The janitor answered carefully, pointing out patterns, timelines, and anomalies that might escape less observant eyes. The atmosphere in the room was tense. Everyone was aware that a serious error could have far-reaching consequences. Executives, advisors, and IT specialists worked together, following the billionaire's instructions but always keeping one eye on the subtle signals the janitor had pointed out. His quiet presence became crucial, guiding decisions and ensuring that nothing was overlooked. The billionaire, usually commanding from a position of authority, now depended on the janitor's observations as much as his own instincts. Hours passed in focused collaboration. The billionaire coordinated actions, verifying each correction and cross-checking results with the team. The janitor remained calm and observant, noticing subtle changes and alerting the team before any problem could escalate. There were moments of tension alerts flashed on the monitors. Calculations didn't match expectations, but each time, the janitor's insight guided the team to the root cause. Slowly, the errors were identified and corrected, and the system began to stabilize. By late afternoon, the immediate danger was averted. The cascading errors had been stopped, and the system was functioning as intended. The billionaire leaned back, exhausted but relieved. He studied the janitor, realizing that this man's careful observation and courage had been instrumental in preventing a major disaster. He had relied on experts and advisors before, but it was this quiet, unnoticed man who had first recognized the problem and guided them through it. The billionaire felt a mix of respect, gratitude, and humility. "You saved us," he said quietly, his tone sincere. "I don't know how to thank you." The janitor shrugged, modest as ever. "I just saw what was wrong," he said simply. "I wanted to make sure it was fixed before it caused problems." The billionaire nodded slowly, taking in the weight of those words. He realized that success often depended not on titles or wealth, but on observation, care, and the willingness to act when others did not. The day ended with a quiet acknowledgement. The billionaire returned to his private office to reflect on what had happened. He thought about the assumptions he had made, the blind spots he had ignored, and the importance of listening to voices from unexpected places. The janitor returned to his routine, quietly satisfied that he had prevented another potential disaster. Recognition was unnecessary. What mattered was that the empire remained intact and the people it affected were safe. In the hallways, life returned to normal. Employees moved through their routines, oblivious to the near crisis that had almost disrupted the company. The billionaire resumed his schedule, now more cautious, but still confident in his leadership. And the janitor, often unseen and underestimated, had once again demonstrated that courage, vigilance, and attention to detail could make the difference between success and catastrophe. That evening, as the janitor left the building, he paused for a moment and looked back. The city lights flickered in the distance, reflecting on the glass walls of the building. He thought about the billionaire, the staff, and the fragile nature of success. A single oversight could have undone years of effort, but careful attention had prevented that. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that even the smallest actions could have enormous impact. And somewhere across town, the billionaire prepared for the next day, thinking about decisions, strategies, and priorities. He had learned a valuable lesson, no matter how much power or money one had. There were always vulnerabilities, always details that could be missed. Sometimes it was the people you overlooked, the quiet observers, who made the most difference. The stage was set for the future. The billionaire had survived another day, thanks to vigilance, collaboration, and the courage of someone who had nothing to gain and everything to risk. The janitor had once again shown that heroes could come from the most unexpected places, and that paying attention, acting decisively, and caring deeply could prevent disaster. Even in the world of wealth and power, the morning after the crisis had been averted. The billionaire arrived at his office with a different perspective. He had spent the night thinking about the events of the past 2 days. For the first time in years, he felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: vulnerability. His empire, which had always seemed untouchable, had nearly been shaken by a tiny oversight. And yet, it had been saved by someone he would have least expected: the janitor. He walked through the familiar hallways of the building. This time, he noticed things he had never paid attention to before. The subtle cracks in the walls, the flickering lights, the misplaced files on desks. Small details that were easy to ignore, but sometimes he realized they could carry enormous consequences. He began to understand that no amount of wealth, power, or expertise could substitute for attention, observation, and care. The world he had built was complex, delicate, and vulnerable to even the smallest errors. Meanwhile, the janitor moved through the building as usual, quietly completing his morning tasks. His mind was calm but alert, as it always was. He had helped prevent disasters before, but each time, it reminded him how easily small things could go unnoticed, and how easily the world could go wrong if people ignored the details. He felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that his actions had protected the company, the people who worked there, and the countless others affected by its operations. By mid-morning, the billionaire had called a private meeting with his closest advisors. It was unusual for him to request their attention so urgently, but he wanted to discuss what had happened, and more importantly, what it had taught him. As they gathered, he spoke with a calm authority, but his tone carried an unfamiliar weight. "We were lucky," he began, "but luck is not a strategy. We nearly lost control of something critical, because someone's observations, someone's willingness to notice what others ignored saved us. And it makes me realize how many blind spots we have." The advisors listened carefully, understanding the gravity of his words. They had been so focused on their tasks, their projections, and their reports that they had overlooked the subtle warnings the janitor had noticed. The billionaire continued, his gaze steady. "It's time we pay attention to everyone, regardless of their position. Insight and value are not defined by titles or status. They are defined by awareness, action, and courage." The janitor, meanwhile, continued his routine quietly, unaware that the billionaire was already speaking about him. He moved through the building, cleaning, organizing, and observing. His mind occasionally wandered back to the events of the past 2 days, but he did not dwell on them. Recognition had never been his goal. He simply wanted to do his job well and ensure that the systems, the people, and the processes were safe. Later in the morning, the billionaire sought him out. He found the janitor in a hallway, quietly moving a cart filled with cleaning supplies. "I want to speak with you," he said. The janitor paused, slightly surprised. The billionaire continued, "Please come with me for a moment." They walked together to a quiet office, away from the bustle of the building. The janitor felt a mixture of curiosity and unease. He had done his job, but he was not used to attention from someone so powerful. The billionaire closed the door and gestured for him to sit. "I wanted to thank you personally," he began. "Your observation, your courage, and your attention to detail prevented a disaster that could have affected millions. You saw what others did not, and you acted. That is remarkable." The janitor nodded quietly, uncomfortable with praise. "I just did what I thought was right," he said simply. The billionaire leaned forward, his expression serious. "Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than recognition or reward, but I want you to know that your contribution matters. You have my respect, and I want to make sure the company recognizes your role in this." The janitor hesitated, not used to such attention. "Thank you, sir," he said finally. "I didn't expect anything. I just wanted to help." The billionaire smiled, a rare warmth in his expression. "That's what makes it extraordinary," he said. "You acted without expectation. That is the kind of integrity and courage that builds true value. I hope you understand how important you are to this company and how much difference you make, even if others don't see it." The janitor nodded, still modest, but a quiet pride settled in his chest. He had done what he always believed was right, and now the man who controlled an empire understood the significance. Over the next few weeks, the billionaire took steps to ensure that such oversights would be harder to ignore in the future. He implemented new systems, created protocols for reporting anomalies, and encouraged employees to speak up regardless of their role. The lessons learned from the janitor's vigilance became a guiding principle in the company. The billionaire realized that success was not only about wealth, strategy, or control, but about listening, observing, and valuing every contribution. The janitor continued his work, moving quietly through the building, his presence almost invisible to most people. But he noticed changes, small gestures of recognition, subtle acknowledgments from staff who had heard about his role. Some employees greeted him with a nod of respect. Others offered a smile or a word of thanks. He accepted them with quiet dignity, but he never sought them. What mattered most was knowing that the company, the people, and the projects were safe, and that his attention had prevented disaster. One evening, as he left the building, he looked back at the glowing windows. Reflecting on the past weeks, the city stretched out before him, bustling and alive. But he thought about the quiet moments that made the difference, the small observations, the decisions to act, and the courage to speak up. He realized that the world was full of opportunities to prevent harm, and that sometimes the most important contributions came from people who were least expected to make them. The billionaire, in his private office, also reflected on the lessons of the past weeks. He had survived a near disaster, not through his own genius alone, but through the insight of someone he had previously overlooked. He recognized that humility, awareness, and the ability to listen were as crucial as strategy and intelligence. He decided to foster a culture where every voice mattered, where attention to detail was valued, and where courage was acknowledged, regardless of status. In the months that followed, the relationship between the billionaire and the janitor changed subtly. While the janitor remained humble, continuing his daily tasks without fanfare, the billionaire occasionally sought his input on minor matters, recognizing the sharpness of his observation. Meetings became more inclusive, protocols more attentive, and the culture of the company shifted in small but significant ways. The empire remained strong, but now it was also safer, more resilient, and more aware of the vulnerabilities that could otherwise go unnoticed. The janitor's story became quietly known among the staff, a tale of vigilance, courage, and integrity. It inspired others to pay closer attention, to speak up, and to understand that even small contributions could have a massive impact. It reminded everyone that recognition was not always necessary, but action, observation, and care were always valuable. The billionaire, often in the public eye and surrounded by accolades, had learned one of the most important lessons of leadership. True insight can come from anyone, at any level, and ignoring it can be costly. One day, as the janitor was finishing his evening rounds, he paused near the top-floor windows and looked out over the city. He thought about the past weeks, the near misses, and the small decisions that had made all the difference. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that his vigilance had helped protect not just a company, but the people whose livelihoods depended on it. He understood that recognition was fleeting, but the impact of one's actions could be lasting. The billionaire, on the other hand, had become more thoughtful in his approach. He had always been confident, ambitious, and driven, but now he carried a subtle humility. He paid attention to details he might once have overlooked, listened to voices he might once have dismissed, and acknowledged that even the smallest observation could prevent catastrophe. The lessons learned from the janitor's actions were now ingrained in his approach to leadership. In the end, both men continued their lives as they had before, but with a deeper understanding of the world and their roles within it. The billionaire continued to build, grow, and make decisions that affected thousands. But he did so with a renewed respect for the importance of vigilance, humility, and listening. The janitor continued his quiet work, ensuring that the small details were noticed and that problems were addressed before they became disasters. The story closed not with grand gestures or dramatic recognition, but with the simple truth that sometimes the most important contributions come from those who are least expected. Courage, observation, and care could make the difference between disaster and safety, between failure and success. And in a world where power and wealth often blind people to subtle dangers. It was the quiet, humble, and observant individuals who could change the course of events in ways that mattered most. The building returned to its normal rhythm. Meetings continued, projects progressed, and life went on as usual. But beneath the surface, a culture had shifted, one that recognized the value of vigilance, humility, and courage. The janitor walked through the hallways each day with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had done the right thing, while the billionaire carried a newfound awareness that true leadership required listening to every voice, observing every detail, and never underestimating the power of the unnoticed. And so, the empire continued, strong and resilient, because a man who cleaned floors had the courage to speak up, and a man who controlled billions had the wisdom to listen. Their story remained largely unseen, quiet in its unfolding, but powerful in its lessons. Success, after all, was not only about strategy or wealth, it was about awareness, its integrity, and the courage to act when it mattered most.